r/explainlikeimfive. Affectionate Sky 3792 says, explain like I'm 5. How does the super rich having tremendous wealth affect the working class economically? I've had many conversations with libertarians who argue that billionaires, the super rich, earned their wealth, and that their wealth is actually beneficial for everyone because it's in a bank, generally speaking, which in turn is reinvested by the bank in the economy. I want to better understand why that isn't true. I don't believe the libertarian argument at all, but just can't explain it well. Crite017 says, there is more than one way to hoard wealth. 1. Stuff it in a mattress. This is never good as it is not back in the economy, so is benefiting nobody other than the person hoarding it. 2. In a bank. Many people believe this also isn't helping anyone, but this is wrong. The money you put into a bank doesn't just sit there. Banks keep back a certain percentage of what you deposit and lend the rest out for loans and mortgages, so this is actually recirculating within the economy for people to buy houses and other things with. 3. In investment/companies. This also benefits the economy as now companies have raised more capital they can expand, buy additional materials, employ more people. Almost nobody, especially not the ultra rich, hoard money inside their home. It would take up far too much space and is just totally impractical. Most billionaires, Elon Musk, Zuckerberg etc., are in category 3. They are rich because they own a percentage of their company and that company is doing well and so its value increases. They can sell part of their stake, but then it reduces their voting share. Selling a huge amount will also reduce their company's value and make people think they have no confidence in it. All of which they want to avoid, not because they care about the money, but because they care about the company. Nuhai says, imagine a playground with 10 kids and 10 toys. Ideally, every kid gets a toy to play with. But what if one kid hoards 8 toys for themselves? The other 9 kids are left to share just 2 toys, causing frustration and fighting. Now, the rich kid might argue, hey, these toys are good for everyone, look, I'll let you borrow one sometimes, and my pile of toys inspires others to want more toys too. But the truth is, no matter how helpful they claim to be, the rest of the kids still don't have enough toys to play with, and the rich kid keeps taking more. This is like billionaires and wealth. When too much money is concentrated at the top, it's not circulating where most people need it. Instead, the super rich invest in things like luxury items or assets that don't directly benefit the working class. Meanwhile, the working class struggles with less money and fewer resources, even though they work hard to keep the playground running. r/explainlikeimfive. Unusual at 9773 says, explain like I'm 5. How did old or ancient empires/nations exactly know their territory's shape, size, and borders? I know it wasn't always accurate, but seeing old maps it's impressively close. Essentially I'm asking what were their methods in oversimplified terms. Sleep Worldbinus says, I mean in large part they didn't. Maps were based on surveying, and that could be dicey. It wasn't until accurate chronometers, clocks, were invented that people could start accurately measuring their longitudinal position on the earth and maps started getting a lot more accurate. In some cases, some countries started to shrink because map had inflated some areas to keep their patrons happy. In fact, the King of France once quipped that he had lost more territory due to the chronometer than he did to any foreign invader. Jen Johnson Jameson says, interesting fact, before he became a general and a president, George Washington was a surveyor. Back then they had to drag around a giant chain with bar links that were like 3 feet long, so they could physically measure out the distances that made up farms or counties or cities, or whatever. I can't imagine how little fun that was. Cargathia says, are you asking about map making, or about political control? Measurements in antiquity were a combination of exhaustive busy-work such as literally measuring the distance in steps between two cities, and, later, calculations based on the positions of the sun at noon and estimates of the size of the earth. For the second, the simple answer is, they often didn't. Many borderlands would be more accurately represented as a blur, rather than a line on a map. Towns and tribes at the very edge might be officially under your control, but independent for all practical purposes. r/explainlikeimfive. Abhay Singh says, explain like I'm 5, what is limited slip differential? How does it impact the driving experience? Carp Simeon says, other commenters have explained what it is and what it's good for. I'm just going to mention a drawback to them. When turning tight corners, you may get some scuffing or chirping from the tires as the wheels aren't completely independent. So when you turn, the outside wheel has a lot farther to travel and should be turning quite a bit faster than the inside wheel. The LSD will wind up and force the inside wheel to spin a bit faster than it wants to, and you get slippage between the wheel and the ground. Really only matters for slow speed, high angle turns on dry pavement, but it's noticeable. Not as bad as locked differentials, which will sometimes just decide that you're not going anywhere until you unload them a bit, unwind the wheel, but more so than open diffs that are happily spinning away at completely different speeds or directions. Van Kirk says, explain like I'm 5, when one wheel slips, the other one grips. That's the Subaru line they used to use. It is beneficial for slippery driving conditions. Fat Bunaip says, basically, a differential is a mechanical setup that allows two wheels on the same axle to spin at different speeds, as opposed to the two wheels being joined by a rigid axle. So imagine your left wheel is stuck in the mud, and your other wheel is in the air. A differential will make the wheel in the air spin really fast, but not do anything for the stuck wheel. A limited slip differential will limit the slip, basically the power that goes to the free wheel, and send more power to the stuck wheel. This is helpful when you need power to all wheels, or to have more power to stuck wheels. Basically it's a way to balance the power given to each wheel, irrespective of how hard it is to turn it, as opposed to just giving the power to the most easily turned wheel. r/explain like I'm 5. Riala Goodby says, explain like I'm 5, naval command during the 18th century. How did getting orders to ships work when a single ship could be anywhere in a 1,000-mile radius? My soul to squeeze says, as others have said, it was very difficult if not impossible. For decades, but really, to this day, as radio, then basic satellite communication, and now global satellite high-speed internet became adopted by the Navy, it caused a lot of tension with ships' captains and their commodores and admirals, because it became possible to micromanage a unit on the other side of the planet, hundreds of miles from land. A phrase I heard when I was still in was something like the killer of command at sea goes by the name VTC. Video teleconference, captains have a tiny fraction of the autonomy they did during the Age of Sail. Oka Stone says, they weren't told exactly what to do. Their orders were in general, go here, fight them, return by. Captains had to be brought up in the Navy. They started as cabin boys or midshipmen, and became officers. They were expected to know what was wanted of them, and 100+ people were their responsibility. If the situation changed, you got some messages ahead of the ship. They'd stop in friendly ports, and you could update the missions. Assuming the captain has a good reason to trust they're legit. If you have a battle, you hoped enough ships showed up. If the war ended, have your people surrender, and hope the other side doesn't want to fire on your ships for funsters. Nonthgul says, warships needed a steady supply of food, water, and other consumables. So they would have set up supply lines in the areas they were operating. Either the ships would enter a friendly port for supply, or they would send out supply barges to prearranged locations. Any new orders would be sent to these supply ports and onto the ships. But usually the admirals stayed with the fleet. Orders from the central command would be quite long with lots of conditionals and allow for a lot of freedom. Quite often an admiral would be sent off with simple orders to just operate in a certain area and then use their best judgment. On several occasions they did not even know if they were at war until the enemy shot at them and would not get any updated orders for the remainder of the war. So they would have to rely on information they gathered themselves and make their own judgments. r/explainlikeimfive. Careless Reality 510 says, explain like I'm 5. Why does the first second I see on a digital clock seem to last longer than the others? DN10 says, I genuinely have never had this experience, so now I'm going to look at some clocks lol. Leotana says, thanks for asking. I've thought about this each time it's happened to me and chalked it off as misperception. Glad to learn that there's a logical explanation. Thifootster says, it is strange that you specifically mention digital clocks because I notice the effect way more on the second hand of analog clocks. Treed to Void Signup says, everybody is blaming our brains. Clocks are lazy, they sit around most of the day doing nothing, but when they see you look at them, they jump back into action and start acting normal. Phenorm says, oh, I actually know this one. So, your brain does this thing with your eyes, where it guesses details about what you're seeing in the instant you see it, by telling you what it saw retroactively. If you look at the clock and the second hand is on 4 for a brief instant, and then changes to 5, but by the time your eyes see it, and send the info to your brain all they see is 5, your brain will tell you that it's been 5 the whole time. From Google. Phenomenon where the brain can seemingly edit or add details to a visual experience after it has already happened, essentially perceiving something as if it occurred slightly later than it actually did, effectively seeing things retroactively. This is due to the brain's predictive processing abilities, where it constructs a perception based on expectations and then updates it with incoming sensory information. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.